It took me a long time to work out how important work culture is, and I think for a lot of people it can seem like quite a nebulous or a vague concept. It affects every aspect of what people do, whether it's the staff, whether it's the clients, whether it's our projection into the whole community. And I think it's very important, and I sometimes do this, if someone is making a decision, there's an opportunity, and I'm not sure whether it's the right way for us to go, I will say, how does that tie in with our culture? And that keeps the whole thing together. If there might be a really good opportunity which we give up on because it doesn't fit in with our culture, I think it's very important to ask that question. It shouldn't be used just as a marketing tool, which it often is. And then, if it's not, paradoxically, it's much easier to sell. That's because it's not easy to be something that you're not. It's much easier to be yourself. I often tell staff not to put on a mask when they enter the workplace. They'll enjoy the workplace a lot more if they don't put a mask on, if they're just themselves, and lead to much better mental health outcomes, something that's a big issue in the legal profession. Likewise, clients often tell me they're shopping around for a lawyer, and I say, good, encourage them to do that because, and I say to them, make sure you go with a lawyer you feel most comfortable with, because we're going to get to know each other pretty well, and you're going to have to be comfortable with me or whoever else you decide to go with. And that's going to be good for all of us. I'm a big believer in respecting everyone rather than just some groups. And yes, that's the minority, but it's also the majority who can sometimes be forgotten. This kind of broad respect to me is where true diversity lies. I know I've experienced some discrimination in the past because I come from a racial minority, but I've never let that worry me too much. And I think it's very important to respect the fact that whether you're part of a minority or a majority, you are all respected and you all respect others. That's obviously quite a broad statement. I suppose there's a fair bit of nuance in it, and you can't just have a bunch of catchphrases which encapsulates all of that. You have to read the nuance. I've been asked what gets me out of bed in the morning and gets me to work, and my response to that is that I usually look forward to work. That's because I've always worked at Robinson Gill, and we've always had a workplace. We're not just another law firm. I feel that quite strongly, and that's because we have these values at Robinson Gill which are pretty important to us, and that revolves around realism and respect. With culture, because it can be quite vague, you really have to have a plan, in my view. And I wrote something many years ago, and I'm pleased to say I haven't really changed that in any significant way. I look back at it recently. What I wrote was essentially a 7-point plan. The first thing is that we take a lot of pride in providing top quality service. That's something that cannot be compromised. The second dot point is the passionate side of the work. If you take a client on, you battle hard for them. There's no holding back. The third part of it is the other side. That's the dispassionate side. You give independent advice regardless of what the client wants to hear. It's very important that you're telling them what you truly believe and you've made an objective assessment on rather than just what they want to hear. And you represent them as best you can regardless of what you think of them personally. That's irrelevant to what we do. The next thing is you look for efficient outcomes for clients. You can cut things short by being efficient. You don't have to go the long route for everything. You want to get an outcome. The fifth dot point is that you act ethically at all times. And for me, that is an uncompromised baseline requirement. And I say this to a lot of lawyers at Robinson Gill, you can never leave that. It's required of us by the profession, but I think it should be required of us anyway by our moral compass. The next thing is I say to people, we're not here to make things unnecessarily difficult for ourselves or for anyone else. And it helps a lot if we can enjoy the work. That's a big plus for everyone in terms of how you respect our culture. And the final dot point is that revenue is important. We have to pay people, but we don't have to focus on that. That happens once we follow all the other paradigms. The next thing I was going to talk about was burnout. It's quite common in the legal fraternity. A lot of lawyers seem to suffer a certain amount of burnout. The first step to avoid burnout, it seems to me, is to understand that what we are doing is not the most important thing in the world. The world will spin without us, and things will crash even with us. I'm particularly pleased with a letter I recently wrote to the Law Institute Journal a few months ago. That's a legal magazine. The previous edition had focused on mental health and discussed all sorts of things that we could do to improve our mental health. My response, and I'll just read an extract of it if I may. Many of us lawyers are control freaks who have always achieved. a lot. We live in a world that seems to drive us towards a perfection that doesn't exist. We need to instead accept non-binary thinking, that we live in a world of grey, that we do what we can, but we will make mistakes. We have to embrace them too. Perhaps we should focus less on how we can improve ourselves to the nth degree, just accept we have some rough edges. Paradoxically, that's more likely to allow us the space to accept ourselves for what we are and not for something that just isn't there. And that has to be good for our mental health.